A 13-year-old boy walked into a patch of woodland expecting to settle an argument. Minutes later, he was bleeding to death after being lured into an ambush planned through social media. How did an online feud become a carefully orchestrated killing? And why didn't anyone realize what was about to happen until it was far too late?
Is the patient conscious and breathing?
Yes, he is, but he's been stabbed.
Okay, so he's been stabbed.
Yeah, in the back, he's actually got a chest wound.
Is he bleeding very heavily?
Yes, he is.
How old is he?
He's a teenager.
The victim was Olly Stevens, a popular schoolboy remembered by friends and family as bright, funny, and deeply loved. He enjoyed football, spending time with friends and the ordinary routines of early teenage life. Nothing about the afternoon ahead suggested it would become the final chapter of his story. Yet investigators would later establish that his movements that day had been influenced by a chain of online interactions unfolding beyond the view of most adults. Those exchanges would ultimately become the key to understanding why he walked willingly toward a meeting that had been arranged in secret. The attack took place in Bugs Bottom, a wooded area in Emmer Green, near Reading. It was a location familiar to local teenagers, offering enough privacy for young people to gather away from busy streets. On the evening of January 3, 2021, emergency responders were called after reports that a boy had been seriously injured.
Okay, so he's been stabbed.
Yeah, in the back, he's actually got a chest wound.
Bleeding very heavily.
Yes, he is.
How old is he?
He's a teenager.
Okay, so what we need to do is start on chest compression. So we need to go at 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1.
Despite every effort to save him, Olly died from stab wounds. News of the killing spread rapidly through the community, leaving residents struggling to comprehend how someone so young could lose his life in circumstances that initially appeared almost impossible to explain. At first glance, investigators faced a question with no obvious answer. There had been no robbery, no known involvement with organized crime, and no evidence that Olly had wandered into a random act of violence. Instead, detectives quickly realized the people responsible already knew him. That single discovery transformed the investigation. This was not a case of strangers crossing paths. It involved children whose lives had become intertwined through school friendships, social circles, and increasingly hostile exchanges online. As officers reconstructed the hours leading to the attack, another unsettling detail emerged. Olly had not stumbled upon his attackers by chance. The meeting itself had been arranged beforehand. Someone had persuaded him to come to the woodland, creating the impression that the confrontation could be resolved face to face. What appeared to be an opportunity to settle an argument would later be exposed in court as something far more sinister. The focus soon shifted toward a teenage girl who knew Olly personally. Court proceedings later established that she had played a central role in arranging the meeting after tensions escalated between Olly and two boys. Investigators concluded that she acted as the link connecting both sides, encouraging Olly to attend while remaining in contact with the others. Her involvement would become one of the defining features of the case, because it demonstrated that the fatal encounter was not a spontaneous explosion of anger, but the result of coordinated communication. The conflict itself had developed through social media and messaging platforms used daily by countless teenagers. According to evidence presented in court, disagreements between the young people intensified through online exchanges, allowing arguments to continue long after they would once have ended outside school gates. The digital environment removed distance, encouraged rapid escalation, and gave participants constant opportunities to provoke one another. By the time the meeting was arranged, emotions had already been amplified by messages exchanged behind screens. Detectives then uncovered evidence showing that one of the boys had armed himself before leaving for the meeting. That discovery fundamentally altered the case. Carrying a knife to a planned confrontation suggested preparation rather than panic, forcing investigators to examine every digital interaction that had preceded the attack. The murder weapon had taken only seconds to use, but understanding why it had been brought required looking back through conversations that stretched across several days. Those conversations painted a disturbing picture. Rather than fading, the dispute had been repeatedly fueled by insults, challenges, and encouragement exchanged online. The prosecution later argued that these communications demonstrated deliberate planning, with participants discussing the confrontation before anyone entered the woodland. Individually, many messages appeared ordinary or immature. Together, they revealed a sequence of decisions that steadily narrowed the path toward violence. The significance of that digital trail extended beyond proving contact between the teenagers. It revealed intent. Investigators were no longer trying to determine whether the meeting had been accidental. They were uncovering evidence that the encounter had been orchestrated step by step. Each recovered message helped establish who knew about the plan, who encouraged it, and who expected Olly to arrive. The phones carried by children had become silent witnesses, preserving details that human memory alone could never have reconstructed. As detectives assembled those pieces, the picture grew darker still. The fatal stabbing itself had lasted only moments, but the prosecution would later argue that the murder was the final act of a sequence that began well before anyone entered Bug's Bottom. The woodland was merely the destination. The real chain of events had unfolded across conversations, decisions, and digital footprints that would soon place 3 young defendants before a court accused of taking part in a killing that shocked the entire country. When detectives examined the recovered messages alongside witness accounts, a pattern emerged that was impossible to ignore. The communications did not simply show teenagers arguing. They demonstrated how a disagreement had evolved into a coordinated meeting with a specific purpose. Prosecutors told the court that the confrontation had been deliberately arranged, with Olly being encouraged to attend while the others prepared for what was to come. The digital evidence allowed investigators to reconstruct the sequence with remarkable precision, turning fragmented conversations into a timeline that explained how the fatal encounter had been set in motion. The role of the teenage girl became even clearer as the investigation progressed. Although she never carried out the stabbing, the court heard that she acted as the intermediary between Olly and the 2 boys. Messages showed she had reassured Olly and helped persuade him to meet, while also communicating with the others. The prosecution argued that without her involvement, the meeting may never have taken place. That conclusion would become central to the case, because it demonstrated that responsibility extended beyond the person holding the knife. Attention then turned to the 2 boys waiting in the woodland. Both were only teenagers themselves, yet the evidence suggested they had arrived expecting a confrontation. One of them carried the knife that would end Olly's life. During the attack, Olly suffered multiple stab wounds and also sustained injuries consistent with being restrained. The prosecution argued that the second boy assisted by preventing him from escaping, allowing the assault to unfold within seconds. That allegation transformed the case from the actions of a lone attacker into a joint enterprise involving multiple participants with different roles. What made the case particularly unusual was not only the ages of those involved, but the quality of the digital evidence available to investigators. Although some messages had disappeared from the platforms on which they were sent, forensic examination of mobile phones recovered enough material to reveal the planning behind the meeting. Those records became far more persuasive than conflicting recollections offered after the event. The devices documented conversations as they happened, preserving intentions that might otherwise have remained hidden forever. Investigators also uncovered messages exchanged after the stabbing that provided further insight into the defendant's state of mind. Rather than supporting claims that the violence had erupted entirely without warning, the communications formed part of a wider body of evidence presented to the jury. Each recovered exchange reinforced the prosecution's argument that the attack could not be understood in isolation. It was the culmination of decisions made over time, with every participant contributing to the chain of events in different ways. As public attention intensified, many people struggled to comprehend how children barely into their teenage years could become involved in such a serious crime. The case challenged long-held assumptions about youth violence. It also highlighted how disputes among young people no longer remained confined to classrooms or neighborhoods. Arguments could continue throughout the day and night, amplified by instant messaging and social media, where emotions often escalated without the moderating influence of parents or teachers. In Olly's case, the court concluded that those digital interactions formed an essential part of the story. The trial was held at the Central Criminal Court, better known as the Old Bailey, where prosecutors carefully presented the electronic evidence alongside witness testimony and forensic findings. Because the defendants were children, legal restrictions protected their identities, and they could not be publicly named. The jury's task was not to judge the wider social issues raised by the case, but to determine whether the evidence proved each defendant's involvement in the murder beyond reasonable doubt. Prosecutors argued that the stabbing was the foreseeable outcome of a meeting arranged with violence already in mind. The defense challenged aspects of that interpretation, but the jury heard extensive evidence about the messages exchanged before the attack, the movements of those involved, and the circumstances inside the woodland. Piece by piece, the prosecution invited jurors to see the killing not as a spontaneous fight, but as the final stage of a planned confrontation. One of the most compelling aspects of the trial was how ordinary pieces of technology became extraordinary evidence. Mobile phones, routinely carried by millions of teenagers, revealed conversations that no adult had witnessed. Investigators did not need to rely solely on memory because the devices preserved timestamps, contacts, and communications that established relationships between the defendants. The murder weapon explained how Olly died. The phones helped explain why. After considering the evidence, the jury returned guilty verdicts. The two boys were convicted of murder. The teenage girl was convicted of manslaughter after the jury concluded she had intentionally participated in arranging the meeting that led to Olly's death, even though she had not carried out the fatal attack herself. The verdicts reflected the different roles established during the trial, while recognizing that all three had contributed to the events that ended a young life. At the sentencing hearing, the judge described the killing as a tragedy that had devastated Olly's family and sent shockwaves through the wider community. The court acknowledged that the defendants were children, but it also emphasized the seriousness of bringing a knife to a planned confrontation and luring another child to the scene. The sentences reflected both the gravity of the crime and the ages of those convicted, balancing punishment with the legal framework governing juvenile offenders. Yet even after the verdicts, one question continued to linger. How had a dispute that might once have ended with harsh words become a carefully arranged meeting ending in murder? For Olly's family, no sentence could restore what had been taken from them. In statements shared after the trial, they spoke of a kind, funny, and caring boy whose future had been stolen in an act of senseless violence. They described the overwhelming emptiness left behind and the painful reality of moving forward without a son, brother, and friend who should have had decades of life ahead of him. Their words served as a reminder that behind every piece of evidence, every court hearing, and every headline was a family forced to endure a loss that could never truly be measured. The case also prompted difficult conversations across the United Kingdom about the changing nature of youth violence. Investigators and prosecutors had not uncovered a complex criminal conspiracy involving seasoned offenders. Instead, they revealed how an argument between school children had escalated through digital communication before ending in fatal violence. The technology itself was never on trial, but the evidence demonstrated how online conversations can accelerate conflicts, making it easier for anger, peer pressure, and poor decisions to build without interruption. The final moments of Olly Stevens' life lasted only seconds. The chain of decisions that led there unfolded over days, one message at a time, until the outcome could no longer be undone. His story is remembered not simply because it was shocking, but because it exposed how modern technology, poor choices, and youth violence can intersect with heartbreaking consequences. Long after the court reached its verdict, one truth remains impossible to escape. Every message sent, every meeting arranged, and every decision made online has the potential to leave a real-world impact. For Olly's family, that impact is permanent, and for everyone else, it stands as a solemn reminder that behind every screen is a real person whose life can be changed forever.